The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of Green Acres and our guests. These general gardening tips and suggestions may work for you, as well as those from alternative sources. When using any garden products or tools, read and follow all label directions. And learn how to make your yard summer strong at bewatersmart.info.
The Green Acres Garden Podcast is the podcast dedicated to helping gardeners hone their growing skills while we celebrate our love of plants. So whether you're new to growing or a seasoned gardener, you're sure to learn something new. Join the fun as we have conversations with world-class growers, passionate green thumbs, and professional garden experts from Green Acres Nursery and Supply. Listen every week. We'll answer questions you didn't know you had. And away we grow. Welcome, one and all. So glad you could make it. This is the Green Acres Garden Podcast, the home for all you plant lovers out there, and consider me included in that. My name is Kevin Jordan. I'm your host, and I am on a mission to learn all that I can about gardening and growing and share that with as many people as possible. So come along for a great ride. We got a good one for you this week. We're going to dig into some wonderful knowledge, cultivate our garden skills, and actually learn a little bit about a beautiful family of plants, the largest family of plants. It's well over 25,000 species. These are those beautiful tropical plants. They are found in every corner of the planet, excluding Antarctica. But these are the plants that you dream about in your dreams of a tropical oasis of just beauty and color and just flowers and blooms everywhere. And of course, I'm talking about orchids. There we go.
Yes.
Austin knows what's up. So we got to sit down with Zach Filippelli, an orchid guru and expert, and he gave us the rundown on all things orchid. Austin, what were your takeaways? How did you enjoy it?
I mean, I had a blast with Zach. I hadn't met him before, but he was a blast to work with.
Oh, yeah.
And he is just incredibly knowledgeable. It was evident right away when he started talking about it because...
When he walked up with his own personal, homemade, homegrown orchids.
I hybridized these orchids. What? Wow. Yeah. He brings them in, and he knows all his terms. He knows his stuff, and I'm just happy to be able to share this with everyone because even if you know about orchids, you're going to learn something. And if you're interested in them or want to get better at taking care of orchids, this is the show for you. Zach's your man. He's going to help you out. And he has a very impressive collection at home.
Oh, yeah.
Of, I think he said, like 1,000 orchids.
Pretty impressive. I like to think I'm a plant dude or person. He's got me beat for sure. He's a plant super daddy.
Super impressive. And he sent me some videos of that. So I'll go ahead and probably put that in our Facebook group.
Oh, yeah.
So go check that out there. And then let's go ahead and jump into this episode. Anything else before we get started,
I just want to say, I think orchids are awesome. They're beautiful. They get a bad rap for being difficult, and I think with our interview with Zach, he's going to dispel all those myths.
He says they're easy.
And shine some light and make something that once seemed difficult seem totally within reach. So I loved it.
Let's get into it. All right, we sat down with Zach Filippelli at the Green Acres Nursery and Supply in Citrus Heights. Let's get into it. Here we go.
So I'm here with Zach Filippelli. Zach, how's it going?
Good, how are you guys?
I'm doing great. Please introduce yourself and tell us what we're going to be talking about today.
Well, my name is Zach Filippelli. I am an orchid lover. I have, I would say, well over 500 orchids growing in a greenhouse. I have maybe 1,000 seedlings growing in a bunch of tubs and flasks, and maybe, a bunch of windowsill phals growing.
Wow. Certified orchid lover.
Yes. At first, it was the challenge. It was definitely, I thought they were hard, and so I thought I was going into something where I was going to be growing this crazy hard plant. I got it home, and at first it was kind of hard for me because I didn't know what to do. There wasn't a lot of information out there, and so I did all the wrong things, like right away. And
that's a good way to learn, sadly.
Exactly, and so when it wasn't working, it kind of made me want to do it more and more and more until I got it to work. And then once I got it to work, I hit the ground running. Like, I dove into every different genus, everything you could possibly think of.
Which, but there's many. As I'm sure you know, orchids are from the largest plant family, well over 25,000 different species. And thanks to people like you, there's even way more cultivars and hybrid varieties. But I think they get a bad rap as being maybe a difficult plant to take care of. Do you think that's true? And what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think that they're a hard plant to take care of. You can put them in an eastern window and essentially forget about them. I think that when they come into the greenhouses, they come in moss, and that there are some things that you have to do in preparation after the flowers have faded. But after that, once you get them dialed in, they just go and go and go.
I love them. Yeah, and the ones you brought they're beautiful. And well, let's get into like orchids. Like I said, they're a huge family. There's so many different varieties and cultivars, hybrids. What are some of your favorites? And do they all need different care?
Yeah, actually, you have. So I'll start with my genuses. My favorite genuses are going to be Cattleya,
Beautiful.
Vandas, Psychopsis. I love a good Phalaenopsis or moth orchid.
Oh yeah, I was researching that. It says there's actually even some Vanda varieties that actually have a fragrance.
Oh, absolutely. So some Vandas are known for their fragrance. The Palmer Vanda is just to die for fragrance-wise.
Because normally you don't think about that. We get these beautiful moth orchids. People give them as gifts, and they're gorgeous, but there's not much fragrance there. So it's kind of nice that other orchids kind of do that for us.
Yes and no, because the breeders are starting to breed scents into the Phalaenopsis. We actually carry several smelling phals now.
Nice.
It's definitely not been the norm, but it is becoming the norm.
I would not mind that. It's nice to have a house plant that can provide not just a beautiful flower, but some fragrance as well.
Yeah, and I actually like to breed for fragrance with the Cattleyas. That's another genus that has a lot of fragrance in the flower.
Yeah, they're beautiful. I mean, come on, they're hard to beat. Well, let's get right into the growth requirements, and we'll just kind of maybe just do them in general. But how much light? You said an east-facing window, but like how much is that proper? Is that just like morning sun? Bright indirect light, like
absolutely, it's all of those things. And why I like to say east-facing window is because if you're able to figure out the orientation of your house, you can observe the eastern window, see the morning sun coming through it, and see when the morning sun leaves and it becomes a bright indirect, and then fades to just a what we call indirect or intermediate light. Once you understand that, you really can kind of understand really a lot of plants, but especially orchids, because they do basically grow, they all basically want a morning sun and then a bright indirect the rest of the day. There are some species like Vandas or Cattleyas that are sun-loving orchids that you can grow in higher light, but even then, they're shaded after like 12 o'clock.
It's pretty smart, because things are nice now. The weather's beautiful outside. But come June, July, August, it's going to get ripping. So even inside our house, probably in that late afternoon sun coming through a window.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something to worry about.
Absolutely. If you're growing them inside, if you're near a south window and there's no pergola and nothing protecting, I would have it like 4 or 5 feet off to the side, 4 or 5 feet back from the window. I think that's a good light source too. Awesome.
When it comes to some of the more typical orchids that we would see that are getting packed into moss, what do we do with that? Do we repot it right when we get home? You mentioned that they're grown in some peat moss when they come to us, but then maybe time to be repotted in a new medium. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. So when you get your Phalaenopsis home, which will be your typical orchid, your moth orchid, I would enjoy the blooms, because if you repot it, you're going to lose the blooms almost like 90% of the time. So as soon as the flowers have died back, what I like to tell people is to cut the flower spike down by the base, actually get rid of the flower spike.
This is when you're repotting?
Yeah, this is when you're repotting. So you'll cut the flower spike. Once the flowers are done, you'll cut the flower spike, take the soft plastic white pot out, get the sphagnum moss out of there. You'll just have your roots. You'll pop your roots in your orchiata bark. You cut your flower spike, so now your plant's going into a vegetative state. It's going to grow new leaves, new roots, and then once the temperature drops 15 degrees, it'll initiate a new flower spike, and then you'll get a new bloom. A lot of people will leave the old flower spike on their Phalaenopsis, and the Phalaenopsis will absolutely bloom from that flower spike, but it's an inferior bloom. It's smaller, it's not as nice, the color isn't there. And then it also stresses the plant out, because the plant doesn't know when it's supposed to be in flower, when it's supposed to be in its dormant stage. Because in nature, a moth would come, pollinate it, it would have a seed pod, and the flower spike would essentially be done. Or it'd be a seed pod, And
then he said then it knows to go back from flowering back into vegetative, produce energy, get stronger, and then flower again.
Again, yep.
That's good. That's a good point. So Bring it home and wait for that flower to fade before you repot.
Yep.
'Cause you don't want to stress it out.
Absolutely, yep.
Now, watering, I think, is a big deal when it comes to our house plants, especially something that's inside. It's kind of protected. They tend not to dry out quite as quick. But how important is watering for these orchids, and what is the best practices that you use?
I let my orchids dry out. I tell people you can put them by your window and kind of forget about them. They can go 8 days, 9 days without water.
I'm guilty of that.
Absolutely. I definitely can go, been 2 weeks. I've been having a busy week at work and forget about it.
Do you have to use any special water? I know there's some people like, I need my reverse osmosis, or do you use in tap? Or
That's so funny you brought it up, because for a long time I used distilled water. I know people who have reverse osmosis systems in their house.
Just for that.
Yep. I'm kind of guilty of collecting rainwater and using rainwater because I feel
that's a great thing.
I feel like it kind of adds a little oomph. I mean, my fertilizer's good too, but really when I started using that rainwater,
there's not a lot of chlorine or chloramine.
Yeah, and I think my area has heavy water, or like a lot of salts in their waters.
Yeah, well, these ones look healthy. So if they're already wet, don't water.
Absolutely,
let them dry out in between. Of course, got to be in a container, because I notice sometimes too they get sold sometimes in very decorative, beautiful like ceramic pots that sometimes that look really nice, but they have no holes for drainage. So you have to pull the plant out, water it separately, let it drip dry, put it back in. But I think some people don't realize that. So how important is it that they're in a container that can breathe or drain?
I can't stress that enough. Every pot I buy orchid specific pots. I don't ever really buy no hole pots or anything like that. The orchids that are out there that have decorative pots that are in the moss, it's just really not good. The roots die out really quick. They're really easy.
Suffocating in too much water if they're in standing water.
Absolutely. When they're in that moss, you're really only supposed to give them about 3 seconds of water every 15 days when you're growing them at home in that moss.
Just enough to slightly rehydrate the moss.
But nobody does that. They soak them in that
I'm guilty. I've done that.
Bottle, yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. So watering is important. How do you tell? Does your plants speak to you? You know how a lot of our house plants and just plants in our landscape, they'll speak to us in a way when they're like, I'm hurting over here. Give me some water. Do they speak to you at all, or is it just more about just having a good routine?
They do. Like I said, the pseudobulbs will shrink on me. The phalaenopsis, the leaves will kind of shrivel on you. They won't be up and firm. They'll be kind of down. And
because they have those big, wide, kind of strap-like leaves. Yeah. They start to get wrinkled up.
They do.
A little like,
the wrinkles are the first sign of dehydration.
Okay.
And so I look for little signs like that.
All right. Temperature. How warm, how cold, how much heat can they take? How much cold can they tolerate? It's interesting about all the watering and the drainage issues, because these plants often come from these amazing parts of the world that get pretty good rainfall.
Yep.
But what kind of temperature do they need?
That's actually a really good question. Orchids, like you said earlier, are one of the biggest genus of plants. So that being said, they grow literally on every continent except for Antarctica. We have native California orchids. The Midwest has native orchids. China has, orchids. And so they do good in several different temperature ranges. Our phalaenopsis that we're dealing with are typically like it in the 60 degree range to 75 degree range.
Same degree range I like.
Yeah, absolutely. Your Cattleyas, they like it a little warmer, so you can let these get up to like 90 degrees. They don't mind it. That's why they do so well in Florida. But your Cymbidiums are considered like a cold orchid. They don't mind the California.
Oh, they can handle a little bit of cool weather?
Yeah, they don't mind the Sacramento. I shouldn't say California, but Sacramento. They call it Mediterranean.
Can you grow them like on a patio, or the Cymbidiums, or?
Absolutely. I have a bunch of, I call my Cymbidiums my outside orchids, or even some Dendrobiums I grow outside. You can grow a lot of orchids outside. It's about allowing the roots to dry out at nighttime. It's all about that nighttime temperature. If it's freezing at night, you don't want wet media, wet roots. If it's bone dry, it will deal with a night or two of really cold temperature.
Interesting. Yeah, because if they're soaked, that water is going to freeze up.
And then they're done. They're done.
Okay, good to know. Now, I know they're little plants, but they are mighty bloomers. How much nutrition do they need, and what is the best approach to feeding orchids?
So that is actually a really good question. I feel like feeding heavy feeders. I feed them a lot. I feed mine. I hope I'm not getting too into the weeds, but
Please.
I do a feed, rinse cycle. So they get fed once, fed another week, and then rinsed third week. And then I just repeat that all year long, especially if they're in active growth. I might pull it back a little bit if they're not in active growth.
Is that a liquid fertilizer?
Yeah, absolutely. Water. I think water soluble is the best way to go. They're epiphytes. They grow on trees. They don't grow on the ground where they're getting organic media breaking down. They're used to getting their nutrients from the rainwater running off the trees, the moss that's kind of in the trees. So,
So is there a specific liquid one that you prefer?
The Jax is good, but any liquid fertilizer is good. If you're fertilizing and the numbers say 10-10-10, that's great. If they say 20-20-20, that's fine too.
And then just use as instructed, so you're not
absolutely, yes. Always read
the correct dilution is important.
It's typically like a half a teaspoon per gallon is usually what they say.
So I feel like one of the first lessons that I learned the hard way when I first loved plants as a youngster was like, more isn't always better.
Yep.
I'd be like, hey, here's all the fertilizer. You can give as much as you want to the plant. And I roasted them because I thought more would be better.
Yep.
But hey, you learn.
Absolutely, I'm guilty of the same thing.
So if I say the word, and hopefully I'm saying this right, the kikis?
Keikis, yeah.
Keikis?
Yeah. I don't think it's a Hawaiian word for baby, so I could be pronouncing it wrong too.
For sure.
Yeah.
So the word, it's a Hawaiian word. It means the child, right?
Yep.
Child plantlets. So when you're talking about orchids, they sometimes produce kikis or keikis.
Yep.
What is that, and what do we do with them?
So those, just like the Hawaiian word, they're baby orchids. They'll come from the flower spikes of Phalaenopsis. They'll come from the side stem of a phal. If they come from a flower spike, we can remove them. If they are cakey off the side of an orchid, we want to kind of keep them attached.
That's cool.
But a good rule of thumb is if your keikis have three roots that are 3 inches long, you're pretty good to harvest them. So the chances are if you can see roots on your keiki, you can probably remove it.
Nice. You just snip it and then put it in some media?
Absolutely, yeah. It's actually super easy.
Have you done that?
Oh, tons of times. Yeah.
It's I just love it when a plant turns into more plants.
Yeah.
Because then I'm like, oh, that money was worth it. Like, I got more. I end up giving them away or sharing them with people. It's just it's an awesome way to make friends.
They actually make this. It's called keiki paste, and you put them on the nodes of your phals, and then your phal, instead of blooming, it produces like 30 keikis.
Is it just hormones and acids or what?
Yeah, it's hormones.
There we go. I like it. Trick that plant.
It's cool though. It gives a really cool effect because those keikis become blooming age like within a year, and then you have this plant that has like hundreds of flowers. It's really cool.
Turned a plant into a mama.
Yeah.
You're like, all right, start reproducing. That's cool. After we've had one bloom, you mentioned we can trim it back. We want it to hopefully encourage it to produce some more healthy roots. Maybe it's another leaf or two.
Yeah.
How do we do that? How do we encourage that, and how do we get to that next bloom?
I always get that question. I tell people all the time. They're like, I can never get to rebloom, and I always have to ask them a list of questions. How often are you feeding? What's the light? What's this? What's that? And they tell me I'm doing everything right. And then finally I get to, well, do you bring it out to your garage? And they're, well, what do you mean? I say, bring it out to your garage. Put it in the garage overnight for about 7 to 10 days. The temperature drop in your garage, it will be more dramatic than maybe your windowsill will be. And that will initiate a flower spike.
The fluctuation.
It's all about dropping that temperature 15 degrees. Oh, and then adversely, if you've dropped in the temperature 5 to 15 degrees and they haven't created a flower spike, more than likely you have a spring blooming or summer blooming Phalaenopsis, so it's going to need a temperature increase. So then you would just
wait.
Yeah, and typically the summer blooming phals don't have because we get so warm here in California, they don't typically have a problem blooming.
That is cool. Yeah, mine's been blooming in my window nonstop, like on the same spike. Luckily, after I repotted, I had cut one back. Then it regrew, it rebloomed, and then now I've been trimming back that spike a little bit. And you're right, I get repeat blooms, but they're not as robust and just magnificent as that initial bloom. So I might have to take your advice.
Yes.
And just bite the bullet and cut it back and maybe give it a little love. And I barely feed it.
Yeah.
And so it might be time.
I would put it on a feed
So I bet it's
cycle.
hungry.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious. I'd love to hear a little bit about your own personal collection. I see you brought a few. Can you talk a little bit about the ones you brought?
Yeah, so these two that I have here.
Some show and tell.
I actually brought this particular one right here because I think this is going to be award quality.
Are you going to show it off and try to get an award for it?
Absolutely. If these blooms make it to next Wednesday, I am absolutely getting that.
Well, and that is a hybrid variety?
It is. It is a Cattleya hybrid. It's a kind of a complex hybrid, but it's essentially a Cattleya hybrid.
Does this plant even have a name?
It doesn't. It is an unnamed hybrid. It's just two crosses. It's a Jiminy crickets crossed with Cattleya landate.
And so is this going to be the Zach special, or how do you get it named?
Possibly. So if we can get this judged, and I happen to actually know this grower that grew this plant, if we can get it judged and it judges good and I get permission from the grower, I will be able to name it.
Philippelli.
Something, yeah. That would actually be nice.
That'd be great. Yeah, I like the sound of that, right?
Yeah.
That's so cool. What do you think, knowing what you know and with your experience, what would be some good orchids for a beginner grower?
I would try your intergenerics. If you're already growing a Phalaenopsis, try an intergeneric like an Insidium or Dendrobium type. That's a really good...
An intergeneric that's like two genus hybridized together?
Yeah, like with the Insidiums, you can breed an Insidium with a Brassia or an Insidium with another Odonum glossum and breed those two together.
Do they ever come into the nursery as that?
Absolutely. We have tons of intergenerics here. Those are typically the other ones that you'll see next to the phals.
That's cool.
Those are really good next step orchids. From your phals going on to an intergeneric. They have the same light requirement, almost the same water regimen. Nice transition.
And before we let you go, can we talk a little bit? So you're in the Sacramento Orchid Society?
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're having their 76th annual orchid show and exotic plant sale, Orchids in Paradise.
Yes.
It's going to be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, April 11th through the 13th.
I'm going to be there. I think you should go.
Dude, I think we're friends now. Yeah. I think I'll have to be there.
There's going to be tons of there's going to be so many orchids that it'll blow your mind. Orchids that you didn't even know existed.
Are you and your colleagues, is there going to be like a show or actually be able to see some of the ones that you and your friends have been cultivating?
Absolutely. I'll have at least 5 or 6 orchids entered in.
I hope you win.
Well, last year I got a 3rd place, so that's kind of a nice.
Dude, that's not bad, especially when you're amongst all these other orchid people.
Yeah.
So make it out there. All right. Cool.
Or if you can't make it there, the Orchid Society, they meet the first Wednesday of every month. Either or.
Well, Zach, I got to say, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. I love your plants. It was so cool that you brought some in. Thank you so much, Zach.
Thank you, guys.
All right, and we are back from our interview with Zach. Big thank you to Zach. Thanks for sitting down with us. Okay, so Kevin, I'm going to go straight to you. What did you think about your talk with Zach?
I loved it. His passion is infectious. I want to go out and get myself my own Dendrobiums and Cattleyas and some Cymbidiums. I've got a few moth orchids, the Phalaenopsis, but I love that enthusiasm, and it makes me want to grow too, and also just having a little confidence. Like, no, you can do it. These are the things you do. Bright indirect light, that east-facing window, the humidity, the watering, they really don't want to be having wet roots all the time. It's, a lot of plants don't want wet feet. Orchids especially. The fertilizing, just keeping them, all those things that you can do, I thought were pretty straightforward. Mm-hmm. And so the key takeaways, bright indirect light, the correct mix of your soil, right? That orchid bark,
right?
Well drained, or the orchid containers are also very unique to orchids. And there's many different types of orchids. So whatever one you choose to grow or bring home, do your research, learn a little bit about that specific kind, and you can gear your approach to it because they're all just a little different. But the one thing they all have in common, they're super beautiful, and they're not that difficult to cultivate and grow.
They are cool, exciting plants to take care of. And it makes me think, we once touched on orchids in the past on a previous episode, and I learned about this online forum for orchid people like Zach and maybe some of our listeners who are really interested in diving into this rabbit hole of orchids. It's called Slipper Talk, and I'll link to that in the episode description. And it's kind of an older style web page, you'll see, but it is rich and active with many users on it all the time, sharing photos and advice and talking to each other about orchids. So there is a community online. If you are interested in this topic, go check that out. But other than that, that's all for this week. Kevin, go ahead and take us out.
Well, thanks a lot to our guest, Zach Filippelli. I loved learning about orchids with you, bud. Hopefully we'll get you back soon. Orchids are so beautiful, folks. If you haven't grown one, give it a shot. They're definitely worth a try. Don't just toss out those moth orchids after they bloom. You can get them to grow and rebloom again. It isn't that difficult.
Right.
So easy, even I can do it.
Nope.
So have a great week, everyone. Please get out there in that garden. There's so much to get after it. Please check back with us next week. We're going to have some incredible episodes with wonderful guests, and we're going to get deep into all things flowers, veggies, and herbs and beyond. We're going to get into it hardcore the next few weeks. So please come back for more garden adventures. Until then, garden friends, happy gardening to you all, and please never stop growing.
Orchids.